6-year-old Clara Hale hadn't spoken since the park accident that left her terrified of the world. Her father, Jonathan Hale, a powerful CEO, brought her to the family's sprawling mansion, desperate for a breakthrough after months of silence and failed therapies. But it wasn't the money, the luxury, or the experts that reached her. It was Emily, a young maid in her 20s with blonde hair, who left delicate paper cranes in the garden and hummed softly as she tended the herbs. When Clara finally looked up at someone and whispered her first word, Jonathan realized that Emily's quiet patience held a power his wealth and authority never could. Before we dive in, if you like this kind of stories of overcoming adversity and justice, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We love seeing how far these stories reach. Now let's jump back in. Enjoy the story. The mansion was silent, except for the faintest hum of a young maid and the tiny, terrified voice of a 6-year-old girl that hadn't been heard in months. The car door clicked shut with a heavy finality. Jonathan Hale, 42, CEO of Hale & Company Logistics, adjusted the cuff of his navy suit as though bracing for battle. The mansion before him loomed, gray stone, ivy-clad, windows like watchful eyes. He'd purchased it last year, a symbol of his empire's success. Yet the silence behind him was louder than any boardroom's applause. His 6-year-old daughter, Clara, stepped out of the car. Blonde hair fell like silk around her pale face. Her small hand clutched a worn, stuffed rabbit, its ear nearly torn off, stitches visible. She didn't look at him. She rarely did. "Careful," he murmured, his voice controlled, polished. The kind of voice that closed million-dollar deals. She adjusted the rabbit in her arms, but didn't respond. Inside the house, marble floors gleamed. The air smelled faintly of polish and lavender oil, carefully curated to impress. Jonathan's shoes clicked sharply as he led her to the grand staircase. Clara followed like a shadow, movements slow, deliberate, each step chosen with care. In his office, he set down his briefcase, glanced at the time, and pulled up an email, another consultant's report on selective mutism. He scrolled through bullet points, memorized phrases, behavioral reinforcement, controlled exposure, consistent routine. His jaw tightened. He tried them all. "Clara," he said softly, turning toward her. She stood near the doorway, rabbit in hand, eyes fixed on the floor. "Do you remember Grandpa's garden?" His tone softened. No answer. A memory stirred. His father, a decorated war veteran, kneeling in that very garden, teaching him patience by trimming roses one thorn at a time. Jonathan had always been the one to rush ahead. He crouched before her now, face level with hers. "You used to laugh there," he whispered, as if saying it aloud could summon the sound. She blinked slowly, expression blank, and hugged the rabbit tighter. Jonathan swallowed his frustration, straightened, and gestured for the house staff. "Take her to the playroom," he said evenly, hiding the ache in his voice. Later that evening, as the household settled into its quiet rhythm, Jonathan sat at his desk, rereading the consultant's instructions. He followed them mechanically, arranging flashcards, practicing soft tones. Clara watched him in silence, her gaze distant, as if separated by glass. When she turned away, he simply adjusted his tie and kept reading aloud, obedient to advice that felt useless against the fortress of her silence. In the kitchen, evening light spilled across polished counters. The smell of simmering broth lingered, soft and comforting. Emily Warren, 26, wiped her hands on a linen cloth and moved with quiet precision. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a simple braid, a few loose strands brushing her cheeks. She worked silently, stacking plates, her motions unhurried but efficient, as if each task carried its own quiet weight. Jonathan entered, his tie loosened but posture still stiff. Clara trailed behind him, holding her rabbit by its ear. "Dinner soon?" he asked. His voice carried authority even when softened. "Yes, sir," Emily replied, her tone calm. She placed silverware on the table with deliberate care. Jonathan barely glanced at her, his attention fixed on Clara's unmoving expression. "Sit here," he instructed, guiding his daughter to a chair. Clara obeyed, her gaze fixed on the rabbit's threadbare face. Emily knelt slightly to meet Clara's eyes. "Would your friend like a seat too?" she asked, nodding toward the stuffed rabbit. Her voice was gentle, without pity. Clara blinked, startled, and slowly nodded. Emily fetched a small napkin, folding it carefully into a square seat for the rabbit. She placed it beside Clara's plate. Jonathan watched, a faint crease forming on his brow. "Thank you," he said curtly. Emily only smiled politely and returned to her work, her hands steady as she ladled soup. She moved like someone used to going unnoticed, but carried herself with quiet dignity. As they ate, Clara traced the edge of the napkin seat with her small fingers, her shoulders slightly less tense. Jonathan noted it, but said nothing. After clearing dishes, Emily paused near the doorway, observing Clara's stillness with a softness in her gaze. "She listens more than she speaks," she murmured almost to herself, not expecting an answer. Jonathan looked up sharply. "Excuse me." Emily straightened. Children notice things adults overlook. Sometimes they wait until it's safe to answer. Jonathan's expression hardened. "She doesn't talk." The words came out clipped, final. Emily met his gaze, unflinching but kind. Silence has its own language. For a moment, Jonathan said nothing. He adjusted his cufflinks instead, retreating behind habit. Emily gathered her tray, offered a polite nod, and slipped out, her soft words lingering behind her like a whisper he couldn't quite dismiss. Jonathan's phone buzzed with a sharp vibration that shattered the quiet dining room. He snatched it from the table. "Hail," he answered, voice clipped. "Sir, the shipment from Rotterdam is stuck at customs," his operations manager said, tension crackling over the line. "They're threatening penalties if we don't respond tonight." Jonathan paced toward his study, ties swinging loosely against his shirt. "Send me the paperwork. Get the legal team on it. I want the revised manifest within 20 minutes. His tone was crisp, efficient. Behind him, Clara sat at the table, legs swinging softly, tracing a finger along the rabbit's torn ear. She didn't look up as her father's voice grew firm. Jonathan's commands came rapid fire. "No, reroute the Tokyo shipment first." "Yes, make them wait." "Tell them." "No, don't tell them anything. Just act." He paused mid-sentence, glancing back. Clara was still, completely still, her wide eyes fixed on nothing. The napkin seat for the rabbit lay crumpled, forgotten. He tightened his grip on the phone. "Hold on," he muttered, covering the receiver with his hand. "Clara," he said, voice softer now. "Do you want your coloring book?" No response. "Sweetheart." His voice cracked slightly, but she didn't blink. The silence around her was heavier than the logistics crisis waiting on the line. Jonathan turned away, irritation edging his words as he barked back into the phone. "Push everything through tonight. Call me back when it's done." He ended the call abruptly. He walked back to Clara, crouching to meet her at eye level. She clutched the rabbit tighter, her knuckles pale. He reached for her hand, but she slid it away gently, as if protecting herself. Jonathan sighed, running a hand over his face. "I'm here, Clara. You know that, don't you?" he whispered. She didn't move. His shoulders sank. The power he wielded in the boardroom meant nothing here. He sat beside her, the leather chair creaking under his weight. For a moment, he stayed still, watching her quiet breathing. The tension in his jaw softened, but the helplessness in his eyes deepened. Outside the window, the last light of evening fell over the mansion's sprawling grounds. Inside, a father and daughter sat in silence, so thick it felt like stone walls between them. A soft rustle drew Jonathan's attention. Clara had risen from her chair without a sound. She moved to the hallway. Rabbit pressed her chest. Jonathan followed at a distance, unsure whether to speak. She paused before a set of tall glass doors leading to the mansion's rear grounds. Her small hand pressed against the cool glass. Beyond lay the garden, once wild, now pruned to perfection by landscapers. Evening mist clung to the hedges. The air outside carried the scent of wet earth. Clara glanced back at him, a flicker of something in her gaze. Not fear, not quite trust, just a pull. Jonathan unlocked the doors and opened them, the hinges creaking softly. "Go on," he murmured. She stepped out, rabbit dangling at her side. Her shoes tapped lightly on the flagstone path. Jonathan followed, his polished loafers loud against the quiet. The garden was wide, edged with trimmed hedges and towering oaks. A single fountain stood at its center, water trickling softly. Clara stopped near it, staring at the slow spiral of water spilling over the stone. Her fingers hovered above the rim, then dipped into the stream. Jonathan shoved his hands into his pockets, unsure what to say. "That fountain's from Florence," he offered, voice low. "Hand-carved marble. 17th century." She didn't turn. She traced the water's edge, eyes following the ripples. He tried again. "Your grandfather loved this garden. He planted roses over there." He gestured toward a carefully arranged bed. His words felt like stones dropping into deep water, vanishing without a sound. Clara crouched, touching a mossy stone near the base of the fountain. She seemed absorbed, her movements slow but deliberate, like someone uncovering a secret. Jonathan crouched beside her. "Do you like it?" No answer. He sighed, leaning back on his heels. For the first time that day, he didn't reach for his phone or check the time. He just watched her. From a distance, a soft rustling sound came. Footsteps. Emily appeared, carrying a basket of fresh herbs. She paused upon seeing them, her expression unreadable but calm. Without a word, she bent to collect rosemary sprigs from a bush, her presence quiet as the mist. Jonathan straightened, feeling suddenly like an intruder in his own garden. Clara remained crouched, fingertips still in the fountain water, completely absorbed. Emily moved closer, her basket filling with herbs, the scent of rosemary and thyme drifting through the cool air. Clara turned her head slightly, following Emily's quiet movements, though she said nothing. Jonathan folded his arms, his stance instinctively authoritative. "She doesn't talk," he said flatly, breaking the hush. His words felt heavier than intended. Emily didn't look at him immediately. She plucked a sprig of sage, inspected it, and placed it in the basket. "Silence is its own language," she replied softly, her tone steady. Jonathan's jaw tightened. "She's been like this for months. We've seen specialists. I know it's wrong." Emily finally met his gaze. Her blue eyes held no defiance, only calm. "Maybe she's not broken," she said. "Maybe she's waiting." Jonathan's brow furrowed. "Waiting for what?" Emily knelt to pick lavender near the fountain, her voice as gentle as the movement of her hands. "For someone to stop trying so hard to fix her." The comment landed like a quiet rebuke. Jonathan bristled and used to being challenged. "That's easy to say," he muttered. Emily straightened, basket in hand, and glanced at Clara, who was still crouched, fingers trailing patterns in the water. Children know when they're safe. They know when they're being rushed. Jonathan exhaled sharply. "I'm her father. I'm doing everything I can." Emily nodded once, her expression softening but unwavering. Sometimes that's the problem. Jonathan blinked, stunned by her audacity. No one spoke to him this way. Not in the office, not even at home. Emily turned away, stepping lightly along the path. "She listens, Mr. Hale," she added over her shoulder. "More than you realize." The sound of her footsteps faded as she disappeared around a hedge, leaving behind only the faint scent of herbs and her words lingering like mist in the air. Jonathan looked down at Clara. She had pulled her hand from the water and was now carefully arranging small stones along the fountain's rim. He crouched again, wanted to say something, but the right words refused to come. Instead, he simply sat beside her, silent. For the first time in years, he felt like someone else was holding the map to a world he didn't know how to enter. The next morning, Jonathan's phone rang before breakfast. He recognized the name on the screen, and his stomach knotted. "Langford," he muttered, answering. "Jonathan," said Victor Langford, his voice smooth as glass. "I hear your Rotterdam shipment's in trouble." "Shame. Investors get nervous about delays like that." Jonathan's hand tightened around the phone. Langford, 50, a rival CEO with a reputation for ruthless acquisitions, was the kind of man who smiled while sharpening knives. "I'll handle it," Jonathan replied, keeping his voice cool. "I'm sure you will. Langford said, a trace of amusement in his tone. Though word around town is you've personal matters keeping you busy. You're only human. Jonathan froze. He looked across the breakfast table. Clara sat in her chair, her stuffed rabbit propped in front of her plate. She was quietly spooning oatmeal into its imaginary mouth. Langford's chuckle over the line was soft, but it stung. Take care of your family, Jonathan. The rest of us will take care of business. Jonathan ended the call without a word. He stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. Emily glanced up from where she was arranging toast on a platter. Bad news? She asked calmly. Nothing I can't handle, Jonathan said, his voice clipped. He straightened his tie, every movement precise. Emily studied him for a beat, but said nothing. Clara continued her quiet play, unaware or pretending not to notice, the tension filling the room. Jonathan pulled out his phone again, sending rapid-fire messages to his legal team. Langford's making moves. Contain him. Watch for hostile acquisitions. His fingers moved fast, his jaw tight. But as he typed, his gaze flicked back to Clara. She was humming softly, a sound so faint it could almost be imagined. She looked at her rabbit with care, adjusting its crooked ear. Jonathan's shoulders stiffened. He slipped the phone back into his pocket. Emily, watch her today, he said briskly. Emily nodded once. Of course. I'll be in the office. He strode out of the dining room, already planning counterattacks. Yet even as he dialed his CFO, he couldn't shake Langford's insinuation. Someone out there knew his daughter's silence wasn't just a family secret. Emily slipped into the staff quarters during a lull in the morning bustle. The small room smelled faintly of detergent and brewed tea, a sharp contrast to the mansion's polished grandeur. A kettle whistled softly on the counter as she hung her apron over a chair. Long night? Asked Mrs. Potter, the head housekeeper, her gray hair pinned neatly back. She poured tea into 2 mugs without waiting for an answer. Emily offered a small smile. You could say that. Mrs. Potter handed her a mug and lowered herself into a chair with the ease of long habit. That little girl, she said gently, quiet as snowfall. Emily wrapped her hands around the warm mug, her gaze drifting to the window overlooking the garden. She's not empty, Emily murmured. She's listening. Mrs. Potter studied her with interest. You sound like a teacher again. Emily's lips curved into a faint smile. Used to be. Mrs. Potter raised her brows. Used to be. Emily's fingers tightened on the mug. Before everything. Her voice was calm, but her eyes darkened. It wasn't for me anymore. Mrs. Potter didn't pry. She only nodded, sipping her tea, her silence a form of respect. A bell rang softly in the hallway, calling the staff back to duty. Emily rose, tucking a stray strand of blonde hair behind her ear. As she passed the kitchen, she noticed a small boy, one of the gardener's sons, standing by the back door, holding a scraped knee and biting his lip to keep from crying. Emily crouched before him without hesitation. What happened? He sniffled, showing her the small wound. She retrieved a bandage and knelt, her movements gentle and unhurried. You're brave, she said softly as she patched him up. The boy nodded, cheeks flushed, then whispered, thank you, before running back outside. Emily straightened, leaning briefly against the wall. A rare softness touched her expression as she hummed a faint tune, a melody too old to place, yet comforting, like a lullaby from another life. For a moment, she let herself breathe, the hum filling the small corridor. Then she picked up her basket of herbs and stepped quietly back toward the garden, her composure restored but her eyes still shadowed by old memories. The garden was empty when Emily stepped outside. Morning mist clung low over the trimmed hedges, softening the edges of the stone paths. She carried the herb basket but paused at the fountain, glancing at the stones Clara had carefully arranged the night before. Their uneven line looked deliberate, like a message only a child could write. Emily crouched and slipped a small object from her apron pocket, a folded paper crane. Its wings were crisp, pale blue against the gray stone. She placed it gently near Clara's stones, adjusting it so its beak pointed toward the fountain's rippling water. She stepped back and lingered for a moment, watching the crane flutter slightly in the morning breeze. Her lips curved faintly. Then she turned and walked away, disappearing behind the tall hedges, leaving only the crane's fragile shape behind. Later, Clara arrived. She wandered in slowly, rabbit dangling from one arm. Her shoes scuffed softly along the stones. She stopped when she saw the crane. Her breath caught. She crouched low, staring at the tiny folded bird. Her fingers hovered above it, hesitant to touch. After a long pause, she reached out and lifted it gently, holding it as if it were alive. She studied its delicate folds, her small brows furrowed in concentration. Slowly, a faint smile flickered across her face, brief, like sunlight breaking through clouds. She tucked the crane carefully between the rabbit's arm and her own, cradling them both close. From the shadows of the hedges, Emily watched silently, her arms crossed loosely over her chest. She made no sound, no move to reveal herself. This moment wasn't hers to claim. Clara wandered further along the fountain, still holding the crane. She traced the moss on the stone edge, humming softly, just a single note, barely audible. Later that evening, Jonathan noticed the paper crane. It was on Clara's nightstand, propped carefully against the lamp. He frowned, picking it up. "Where did this come from?" he asked. Clara sat cross-legged on her bed, hugging her rabbit. She didn't answer. She only reached for the crane, taking it gently from his hand. Jonathan studied her for a moment, puzzled. He set it back down, his fingers brushing its delicate wings. Something was happening, but he couldn't name it. The lobby of Hale and Company gleamed under fluorescent lights. Jonathan stepped in, briefcase in hand, heading toward his office. His phone vibrated, a message from Langford, in town. "Let's meet." Minutes later, Victor Langford appeared, leaning casually against the reception desk. His tailored suit and polished shoes made him look untouchable. His smile was thin, calculating. "Jonathan," he said, voice warm, almost friendly. "I didn't expect to see you here so early." Jonathan's jaw tightened. "Langford." Langford's gaze flicked toward Clara, who was quietly sitting with her rabbit in a corner. "And this must be the little one keeping you occupied." He paused, letting the words hang. "I hear she's selective with her company." Jonathan's face remained neutral, but inside, anger simmered. He clenched his fists. "I thought perhaps a meeting over coffee would do." Langford continued, stepping closer. "It's always easier to discuss business when personal matters aren't pressing." Jonathan's teeth ground together. He kept his tone even. "We're not here to discuss my family." Langford smiled faintly, leaning back against the desk. "Of course, but people notice. Investors notice. Stability is reassuring." Jonathan's gaze darted to Clara. She was carefully straightening the rabbit's ear, oblivious to the tension. Her small presence was a silent accusation. Langford lowered his voice, a final, sharp barb. "It's impressive, though, how you balance it all. Most men in your position, they crumble when their children demand attention." Jonathan felt the words sting more than any financial threat. He wanted to speak, to defend, but the right words dissolved in his throat. Langford straightened, brushing imaginary dust from his sleeve. "Well, I'll leave you to it, Jonathan. Enjoy your morning together." He walked away, every step deliberate. The words lingered, heavy and precise, an invisible knife aimed at the heart of Jonathan's private world. Jonathan stood frozen, watching Langford leave. Clara's eyes briefly met his. She said nothing, but her small hand pressed the rabbit closer. The lobby felt colder. The challenge had been made. Jonathan knew Langford wasn't just threatening business. He had glimpsed the fragile, silent corner of Jonathan's life, and he intended to use it. The next morning, the mansion was quieter than usual. Mist clung to the garden paths, and Clara led Jonathan silently toward the fountain. Emily followed a few steps behind, carrying her basket of herbs. Jonathan glanced at his watch. Ignore it, he thought, slipping the device into his pocket. Today wasn't about schedules. Emily crouched near the fountain, placing a small sprig of rosemary in the water, letting it float. She began speaking softly, her words not directed at anyone in particular. "Once, There was a bird that forgot how to sing, she said. Her voice was calm, steady, carrying over the gentle trickle of the fountain. It watched the wind and the leaves, and though it didn't chirp, it learned to listen. One day, it tried to hum, and the forest remembered it. Clara's eyes widened slightly, following the floating rosemary. Her fingers hovered, almost touching the water, then retreated. Jonathan watched, skeptical. A story for a child? He muttered under his breath. Emily glanced at him, but didn't break the rhythm of her voice. Stories aren't just for children. Sometimes, they remind us what we've forgotten, that even silence has meaning. Clara leaned closer to the fountain. She dipped her small fingers in the water, watching ripples distort the rosemary sprig. Her lips moved slightly, just the faintest sound, a soft hum barely audible. Jonathan froze. He frowned. Is she reacting? Emily continued, serene. The bird waited for the right moment, not because it was weak, but because the forest was patient. Clara's hum grew a fraction louder, a note of curiosity threading through it. She looked at Emily, then down at the floating rosemary, and back again. Jonathan sighed, leaning against the stone edge of the fountain. Fairy tale, he muttered, but his tone lacked conviction. Emily smiled faintly, eyes soft. Sometimes, Mr. Hale, fairy tales are the first language a soul can trust. For a moment, the only sound in the garden was the fountain's trickle, Clara's delicate hum, and the soft rustle of herbs in Emily's basket. A subtle shift had begun. Jonathan's phone vibrated violently in his pocket. He pulled it out, face tightening as he read the message. Langford is moving fast. Sabotage in process. Immediate action required. He left the garden without a word, the hum of Clara's attempt at sound fading behind him. Emily followed, silently understanding he needed space. In the office, chaos had already begun. Staff moved quickly, shuffling papers and whispering under their breaths. Screens flashed warnings, shipment errors, contract breaches, and a mounting investor panic. Jonathan grabbed the phone. Status on Rotterdam? His voice snapped through the line, precise, commanding. Sir, they've blocked the release. Langford's team. I don't want excuses. I want solutions. Now. His hands clenched the edge of the desk. The office door burst open. Langford himself had arrived, casually leaning against the frame, a faint smirk playing on his lips. Jonathan, he said smoothly, I see the family distractions didn't keep you away from a fight. Jonathan straightened, masking the tension with corporate armor. Langford, what are you doing here? Langford's eyes flicked subtly to the side where the board monitors displayed Clara's school photo, a small detail Jonathan hadn't noticed anyone could see. Merely admiring your multitasking skills. Balancing personal and professional matters is a challenge, I hear. Jonathan's colleagues exchanged glances. The thinly veiled jab about his daughter landed in a room already tense with business chaos. Langford stepped forward. I imagine it's difficult to appear stable when the people you care about most are delicate. His voice was smooth but cutting, crafted to humiliate without raising a hand. Jonathan felt heat rising, a mixture of professional fury and paternal fear. He could handle hostile acquisitions, shipping crises, and investor outrage. But this was personal. Langford turned and moved closer to the screens. Perhaps we should discuss the project's failure in front of your team. Everyone deserves to see how distractions affect leadership. Jonathan's knuckles whitened around the edge of his desk. He opened his mouth, ready to respond, but the words died as Langford's presence loomed, a reminder of both professional threat and personal vulnerability. The office felt smaller, the walls pressing in. The battle Jonathan usually won with intellect alone suddenly felt impossible. Jonathan's hand hovered over the keyboard, ready to fire off instructions to salvage the Rotterdam shipment, when a soft commotion at the refreshment table caught his attention. Emily appeared, carrying a tray of drinks. She moved with her usual calm precision, unaware, or pretending to be, of the confrontation unfolding. Langford's gaze flicked to her. Ah, the housekeeper, he said with a thin smile, mocking yet polite. Isn't it quaint how everyone has their role? Emily set down a glass, just as Langford leaned forward to grab a folder. The tray shifted slightly. A cup teetered, then toppled, spilling water across the polished surface. Langford jerked back instinctively, papers fluttering onto the floor. "Oh!" Emily exclaimed, stepping back as if startled. She quickly wiped the spill, apologizing softly. "I'm so sorry. Clumsy of me." Jonathan blinked, momentarily stunned. The distraction gave his staff the split second they needed to recover, collecting scattered documents and shuffling them back into place. Langford straightened, attempting to regain composure, but the rhythm of his attack had been disrupted. Jonathan's associate immediately seized the opportunity, pulling Langford aside for a clarification on the legal hold, effectively diffusing the confrontation. Jonathan watched Emily as she moved away, her expression serene. No one else in the room seemed to notice anything unusual. Yet, Jonathan understood. This had been deliberate, perfectly timed. A subtle, unspoken intervention. Langford, visibly frustrated but maintaining his polished facade, finally straightened. "Well, it seems we'll reconvene later," he said, forcing a polite smile before exiting the office. Jonathan exhaled, tension draining slowly from his shoulders. He approached Emily, who met his gaze calmly. "Coincidence?" he asked quietly, almost under his breath. Emily tilted her head, a faint smile playing on her lips. "Sometimes, Mr. Hale," she said softly. "Timing is everything." Jonathan glanced toward the closed office door, where Clara's photo still sat, her small face a reminder of why subtlety mattered. He knew Emily's intervention had been for more than just business. It had safeguarded the fragile corner of his personal world he couldn't protect on his own. The garden was bathed in the soft glow of late afternoon. Golden light filtered through the oaks, casting elongated shadows across the flagstone path. Jonathan walked slowly beside Clara, who carried her rabbit in the pale blue paper crane Emily had left days before. A small breeze stirred the fountain water, causing ripples that shimmered like liquid gold. Clara paused, her eyes wide, and reached out with delicate fingers to touch the dancing surface. Jonathan crouched beside her, silently watching. The rush of the day's crises, the threats, the sabotage, the boardroom chaos, felt distant, almost meaningless. He glanced at his phone, which vibrated insistently in his pocket. Another urgent message. He looked back at Clara. For the first time, her expression softened, a small, genuine smile breaking through the armor of silence. The faintest flicker of sound escaped her lips, a breath, a hum, delicate as a bird's first note at dawn. Jonathan's hand hovered near hers, wanting to reach out but resisting. He didn't speak, didn't interrupt. He simply allowed the moment to exist fully, letting her reaction unfold without pressure. Clara traced the edge of the paper crane with her fingertips, her small thumb brushing the folded wings. She looked up briefly at Jonathan, then back at the fountain, and her smile deepened ever so slightly. The phone buzzed again. He glanced at it, saw the urgent work alert, and then deliberately slipped it back into his pocket. Instead, he shifted closer to Clara, letting the warmth of the fading sun spill across them both. Silence stretched between them, but it no longer felt oppressive. It was shared, sacred. For a brief moment, the world contracted to just the two of them, the paper crane and the glimmering water. Jonathan's chest ached, but not with frustration. It was a quiet, profound ache of connection finally emerging. He reached toward her shoulder, not touching, just offering presence. She turned her gaze fully to him, her small lips parting once more in a soft, almost imperceptible hum. Jonathan exhaled, barely holding back tears. The weight of years, the pressure of countless battles, and the helplessness he had felt for months seemed to lift in that single fragile instant. He didn't speak. He didn't celebrate. He simply shared the moment, a silent acknowledgement that something fundamental had shifted. Later that evening, Jonathan found Emily tending the herb garden. The sun had dipped lower, painting the sky in soft oranges and pinks. He approached quietly, unsure how to begin. "Emily," he said finally, voice low. I, I don't understand. How do you do it? How do you reach her? Emily paused, brushing soil from her hands. She looked up, calm but piercing. Jonathan, the silence isn't damage. It's protection. Her mind locks doors to keep her safe after trauma. Jonathan frowned. But I've tried everything, therapists, schedules, exercises. She won't respond. Emily straightened, setting a small rosemary sprig into the soil. You've been trying to force doors open. That's not the goal. The goal is to make the world outside so safe she chooses to emerge. Jonathan's shoulders sagged. So all this time, I've been doing it wrong. Emily tilted her head, studying him gently. Does she ever just see you be? Without instructions, without schedules. Jonathan blinked. The question settled in his chest. Uncomfortable, but undeniable. Your homework, Emily said softly, is simple. Stop trying to fix her. Just be present. Let her choose the moments she shares with you. The rest will follow. Jonathan nodded slowly, swallowing hard. The simplicity of it felt impossible. Yet beneath the weight of corporate battles, sabotage, and frustration, he understood that this was exactly what he needed to do. Emily's gaze softened. Tomorrow, no phones, no work, just the garden, the fountain, and her. Jonathan exhaled, letting the tension seep out. I'll try, he said, almost a whisper. Emily offered a faint smile. That's all she needs. And you, Jonathan, that's all any of you need. The evening breeze stirred the herbs, carrying their scent softly. Jonathan remained in the garden for a while longer, absorbing her words, letting them sink. For the first time, he felt a pathway forward, a chance to truly be present for Clara, not as a CEO or problem solver, but as her father. The next morning, sunlight poured across the garden, golden and warm. Clara stood near the fountain, rabbit in one arm, the pale blue paper crane balanced carefully on the other. Jonathan remained close, hands loosely at his sides, resisting the urge to organize, instruct, or correct. Emily knelt nearby, arranging a few herbs in the soil, humming softly. Her presence was steady, non-intrusive. The world outside, the threats, Langford's provocations, the endless boardroom crises, was gone. For this moment, only the garden existed. Clara's eyes tracked the sunlight on the fountain, catching a droplet as it spilled over the edge. She bent low, fingers brushing the rippling water. Jonathan stood still, holding his breath. Then, something miraculous happened. Clara's lips parted. A single word, clear and deliberate. Daddy. Jonathan's chest tightened, tears brimming, unbidden. The sound was fragile, fleeting, yet it shattered every barrier he had felt between them. He moved closer, but cautiously, not wanting to overwhelm her. Yes, sweetheart, he whispered, voice trembling. Clara repeated it softly, a tentative echo, then touched his hand with hers, gripping only briefly. The connection was immediate, electric, yet delicate. No dramatic gestures, no shouting of joy, just the quiet acknowledgement of a bond finally spoken aloud. Emily watched from a few feet away, her hands still in the soil, her eyes reflecting a mix of pride and relief. She didn't intervene, letting the moment breathe. Jonathan knelt to meet Clara's gaze, heart pounding. I'm here, he said softly. I've always been here. Clara's small fingers pressed against his hand again. She didn't pull away. She didn't speak another word yet. That one word, Daddy, was enough. Enough to bridge months of silence, fear, and guarded distance. Jonathan exhaled slowly, tears sliding down his cheeks, unashamed. The breakthrough wasn't loud. It wasn't a spectacle, but it was real, and it was theirs. For the first time in what felt like forever, Jonathan and Clara simply shared the moment, side by side, the paper crane floating gently in the fountain between them. A few days later, the garden had become their quiet ritual. Clara wandered among the herbs and stones, rabbit and crane in hand, while Jonathan lingered nearby, phone forgotten, briefcase untouched. Emily moved between them, lightly tending plants, offering guidance only when asked. Her presence was a bridge, steady, calm, non-intrusive. Clara knelt by the fountain, tracing the ripples in the water with her small fingers. "Emily," she said softly, her voice carrying the name clearly for the first time. Jonathan froze, heart pounding. His old instinct rose immediately. Record this. Capture this moment. Don't let it slip. He opened his mouth to speak. Emily shook her head gently. Let this moment be hers. Not a file, she said softly, her gaze unwavering. Jonathan paused, then lowered his hands. The wisdom in her words sank in, cutting through years of habitual control. He simply watched, allowing Clara to choose how to engage with the world. Clara looked up at Jonathan briefly, then back at the fountain, and began speaking in small, fragmented phrases. Words she had kept locked away started to emerge naturally. Jonathan's chest swelled, not with triumph, but with awe. He realized that presence, not authority, had opened the door. Later, as the sun dipped behind the oaks, Clara finally spoke about the accident that had silenced her. The moment she had fallen in the park, the panic that followed, and the fear of being unheard. Her words were halting, but each one carried relief. Jonathan listened, never interrupting, holding her hand in quiet support. When she finished, he made a simple choice. He canceled all meetings for the evening, setting aside work entirely. They lingered in the garden, Emily nearby, but unobtrusive. The three of them shared the fading light, the hum of the fountain, and the newfound rhythm of trust. The breakthrough was no longer a single word. It was the ongoing, fragile, but undeniable flow of connection. In a dimly lit office across town, Victor Langford leaned back in a leather chair, the city lights reflecting coldly off the glass behind him. His fingers drummed the desk with quiet rhythm, a predator savoring the hunt. A file sat open before him, its contents carefully concealed from view. A junior analyst shuffled nervously into the room. "Sir, the information on Emily, it's—" Langford's sharp glance silenced him. "Yes." The analyst swallowed. "Her past. There's an incident. Years ago, she was recognized for an act of heroism during a fire at a children's school. It was well documented, but largely forgotten." Langford's lips curled into a faint, calculating smile. "Ah, perfect." He tapped the file with deliberate precision. Heroism, recognition, public record, vulnerability disguised as virtue. He leaned forward, voice low and precise. "This is gold. The press will love the story. They'll frame it as failure, negligence, misjudgment. It will humiliate her, discredit Hale, and make that little girl, Jonathan's daughter, a symbol of instability." The analyst nodded, visibly shaken. "You're sure this can be used at the board meeting?" Langford's eyes gleamed with cold amusement. "Not just the board meeting. Every public forum, every press release. We'll craft it carefully. Timing is everything. And Jonathan, he will have no idea until the blow lands." He opened a drawer and pulled out an old photograph. It showed a younger Emily, blonde hair streaked with soot, cradling a small child rescued from a burning classroom. The image radiated quiet heroism, innocent, brave, undeniable. Langford's fingers traced the edges. "To most, this is inspiring. To me, it's a weapon. A truth twisted just enough to wound those who care. Fear, doubt, guilt, all exposed publicly." He leaned back, folding his hands over his chest. Jonathan Hale has finally learned the limits of control. Let's see how he handles it when his daughter's presence in this story becomes part of the narrative. The analyst swallowed again, realizing the depth of the trap being set. And if Emily intervenes? Or if the child resists? Langford laughed softly, a sound without warmth. Then we escalate. The more they care, the more fragile their defenses. By the time they realize, the narrative is already theirs to manipulate. He looked out at the city, lights flickering like distant stars, and whispered, almost to himself, "The stage is set. The pieces are in motion. Now we wait for the performance." Outside the office, the night pressed in, quiet and expectant. The trap was poised to strike, and Langford's confidence radiated like a shadow over every corner of Jonathan's world. Jonathan entered, Clara in tow, her small hand gripping his. Emily followed quietly, her basket now empty, a silent guardian of the fragile equilibrium. Victor Langford stood at the podium, smiling with practiced charm. He waved, welcoming the attendees, but his eyes flicked briefly to Jonathan and Clara, a faint smirk betraying his hidden intentions. Jonathan's heart tightened. He had suspected the trap, but seeing it in motion, the carefully orchestrated crowd, the cameras angled just so, made the risk painfully real. Langford began, voice smooth. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. Tonight, we celebrate achievements in our field. Yet it is impossible to ignore the human elements behind success. Jonathan shifted slightly, protective instinct flaring as Clara clutched her rabbit tighter. Emily's gaze remained steady on the child, ready to intervene silently if necessary. Langford clicked a remote. The large screen behind him flickered to life. There, in full view of every guest, was an old photograph of Emily. Blonde hair streaked with soot, holding a rescued child. A caption implied recklessness in her past, careless heroism, irresponsible risk. The murmurs began immediately, a ripple through the crowd. Jonathan's jaw clenched, anger and fear battling. He glanced at Clara, who looked puzzled, eyes wide at the sudden attention. Langford leaned forward, voice silky, venomous. And in the same vein, Mr. Hale's personal world intersects with this story. One cannot lead a company and manage personal vulnerabilities without consequences. Stability is a delicate balance. Jonathan's hands tightened on Clara's shoulders. He felt the weight of every gaze, every camera aimed at them. The room, intended as a stage for praise, had become a trap, a performance designed to humiliate and destabilize. Emily stepped slightly forward, ready, but Jonathan placed a calming hand on her arm. He could feel the tension radiating from every corner. The carefully planted whispers meant to undermine him and exploit the child's presence. Langford's smile widened. So, tonight, we examine the choices we make. Every action has consequences. Every silence speaks volumes. And some truths, he paused, letting the words hang like a knife, are not always convenient. The screen glitched slightly, the image lingering, and Jonathan realized the moment was on the brink, poised to break, to overwhelm. Yet somewhere in the room, hidden from the crowd, a subtle shift had already begun. Jonathan felt every heartbeat reverberate in his chest, the tension stretching tight like a bowstring. Then, quietly, a figure stepped forward from the back of the room. Emily. Her hands were clean, her posture steady, her eyes unwavering. She approached the podium with calm dignity, unnoticed at first by most. "May I speak?" she said, voice soft but commanding. The crowd's murmur hushed, drawn inexplicably to her presence. Langford's eyes narrowed, a flicker of irritation crossing his smooth facade. "Excuse me." Emily ignored him. She held the microphone with steady hands. "This photograph shows a moment of courage. A child saved, lives preserved. Any claim of negligence is false. It is a testament to dedication and bravery." Her words were precise, factual, and unassailable. She didn't raise her voice, didn't plead. She simply presented truth. Murmurs shifted from curiosity to admiration. From the side of the room, a man stepped forward, one of the children Emily had rescued years ago. He nodded toward the photograph. "She saved me, and many others. That is the truth." Langford's smile faltered. He opened his mouth, but before he could spin the narrative further, a small voice pierced the tension. "Stop." All eyes turned to Clara. She stood, small and resolute, holding her rabbit tightly. Her voice, once silent and fragile, now carried across the room, clear and unwavering. The word demanded attention, not with anger, but with authority. The crowd froze. Cameras clicked, capturing the moment. Langford's smirk dissolved into stunned silence, his carefully constructed trap crumbling under the weight of truth and courage. Jonathan knelt beside Clara, eyes wide with pride, hand resting lightly on her shoulder. Emily stood beside him, serene, her expression revealing only a quiet satisfaction. The applause began slowly, swelling to fill the room. It was genuine, spontaneous, and entirely earned. The antagonist's power, built on insinuation and fear, was shattered. Langford remained frozen at the podium, his influence evaporating as the audience celebrated the bravery, honesty, and dignity of those he had sought to undermine. Jonathan and Clara shared a glance, unspoken acknowledgement passing between them. The battle had been won, not through force or strategy alone, but through courage, truth, and the quiet voice of a child finally heard. Chaos rippled through the ballroom as applause swelled. Investors whispered, journalists jotted notes furiously, and Langford stood frozen, his influence unraveling. The air was thick with tension and revelation. Figures of authority, alerted by the dramatic exposure, approached Langford. A senior compliance officer moved swiftly to confiscate the misleading documents. Another team revealed inconsistencies in Langford's charitable ventures, confirming long-suspected fraud. Jonathan exhaled slowly, keeping Clara close. She leaned against him, rabbit in arm, her small hand brushing his. The once fragile connection now felt steady, fortified by the courage she had just displayed. One of Jonathan's associates approached, visibly relieved. "Mr. Hale, the deal is back on," she said, eyes bright. "With new ethics clauses. We'll proceed only under full transparency." Jonathan nodded, the weight of months of stress lifting slightly. He glanced at Emily, who stood quietly, her hands folded, observing the aftermath without fanfare. Her calm had guided them through both personal and professional crises. Clara's gaze wandered to the man who had testified on Emily's behalf, the child saved all those years ago. Slowly, she stepped forward, curiosity softening her usual reserve. A quiet kinship formed in the shared recognition of courage and protection. Outside the ballroom, Langford was escorted away, his carefully constructed empire dissolving amid legal threats and public scrutiny. His threats, once looming over Jonathan's life and company, had evaporated under the weight of truth and integrity. Jonathan crouched beside Clara in the quiet of the garden later that evening. "You were amazing," he whispered, brushing her hair back gently. She looked up at him, smile faint but real. "I said, stop," she reminded him softly, as if to mark the moment. Emily knelt nearby, adjusting a small sprig of rosemary in the fountain. She offered only a slight nod to Jonathan, a silent acknowledgement that the lesson had been learned and that trust, patience, and presence had prevailed. Jonathan finally allowed himself to breathe fully. For the first time, the professional and personal crises coexisted without conflict, both contained and understood. The external battle was over, and the fragile, precious internal world of his daughter had been validated and protected. The three of them lingered quietly, the fountain's gentle trickle filling the air. The chaos of the day faded, replaced by calm, presence, and a shared understanding that the difficult path they had walked had led to a hard-earned victory. The morning after the event, sunlight spilled through the tall windows of Jonathan's office. Papers were stacked neatly, but his attention was not on them. He was on a call, delegating responsibilities with a newfound balance, his tone calm but authoritative. "Yes, proceed with the delegation," he said, "and make sure the foundation funds are released. Emily will oversee the children's program directly." He hung up and leaned back in his chair, fingers lightly touching the pale blue paper crane sitting on his desk, a small symbol of trust, patience, and breakthrough. The work was important, yes, but not at the expense of presence. Jonathan glanced out the window at the mansion's garden. Clara was already outside, helping a younger child navigate the stone path to the fountain. Her laugh was small, confident, and free. She held the paper crane carefully, now a shared treasure she had chosen to pass along. Emily appeared at the garden gate, observing. Jonathan rose and approached her, offering a quiet nod of acknowledgement. "The role," he said softly, "is yours if you wish it. I wanted to honor your way, not mine." Emily's eyes widened slightly, a mix of surprise and consideration. I would like that," she replied cautiously. But it must stay true to the children's pace, their needs, not schedules. Jonathan smiled faintly. Exactly. You have the space to shape it as you see fit. Emily stepped forward into the sunlight, brushing a strand of blonde hair from her face. She moved among the children naturally, guiding them gently, showing them the fountain, the herbs, and the small rituals she had established. Her presence was both calm and commanding without dominance. Jonathan watched from the veranda. Clara was already showing another child how to fold a paper crane, her small fingers steady, her laughter rippling. The garden was alive with quiet energy, subtle lessons, and the slow rhythm of patient guidance. Jonathan returned inside, resuming his work with a lighter step. His phone remained silent. Meetings had been delegated. He had created a professional architecture that allowed focus without intrusion. Through the large office window, he watched Emily and Clara together. The mentorship, the patience, the breakthroughs, they were real. The world had shifted, and in that shift, Jonathan finally understood that presence, patience, and trust were as critical as any boardroom decision. The garden thrived, the foundation was in motion, and the new roles were defined, not by power or control, but by respect, observation, and genuine care. Months later, the mansion garden was alive with gentle activity. The fountain rippled under the warm sun, flowers in full bloom, herbs fragrant in a breeze. The space had grown into a sanctuary not just for Clara, but for other children, guided carefully by Emily. Clara moved among them with confidence, teaching a small child how to fold a paper crane. Her voice was clear and calm, instructions gentle but assured. She laughed softly when a younger child made a crooked fold, then corrected it patiently, her tiny hands steady. The lessons she had absorbed from Emily now flowed naturally, unforced. Jonathan leaned against the veranda railing, observing. His posture was relaxed, shoulders no longer stiff with constant vigilance. He carried no briefcase, checked no phone. Instead, he simply watched, fully present. When Clara glanced up and smiled at him, he returned the smile, heart unburdened and quiet. Emily moved among the children like a guiding current, soft words, gentle corrections, and calm encouragement. Her presence was a subtle but constant force, teaching, observing, nurturing without dominating. She caught Jonathan's eye and offered a small nod, a silent acknowledgement of shared progress. The children explored the fountain, the stone paths, and the herb patches. Paper cranes were scattered throughout, some floating in the water, others balanced carefully on stones. Each crane told a story of patience, trust, and connection. Clara paused by the fountain, touching the water, then turned to Jonathan. "Daddy," she said softly, and he responded with a smile, his hand brushing hers briefly. The word no longer carried hesitation. It was natural, confident, and full of presence. Jonathan felt a quiet swell of pride. He had learned to prioritize being over fixing, to honor the moment rather than controlling it. Healing had become a shared rhythm, patient and ongoing, extending beyond his daughter to the other children in the sanctuary. Emily hummed softly as she adjusted a small sprig of rosemary, her gentle melody mingling with laughter and the ripple of the fountain. The garden thrived, alive with patient guidance and joy. Jonathan, Clara, and Emily shared a final glance, silent, complete. The world outside remained, but here, in the sanctuary of the evergreen garden, a new normal had been built, a space of presence, healing, and quiet, enduring hope. The camera of imagination would linger on the fountain, the cranes, and the gentle hum, a lasting anthem of patience and connection. Thank you for following this story. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe and share your thoughts below. Where are you watching from? Let us know in the comments. Stay tuned for more immersive stories.